Welcome to this episode of A Facilitator's Journey. Today I'm joined by Marcus Crowe, the co-founder of 10,000 Hours. Marcus is first and foremost an accidental facilitator, as he said. He fell into the profession at a young age when he discovered that you could get paid. You could get paid to facilitate and to train. He and I have a great conversation discussing where he started, what it takes to run a business, how do you work with co-founders. So, you know the drill now. Grab a cuppa, pull up a seat, tune in your ears, and join me for today's episode. Hey, Marcus.
Hey, Kirsty.
Good to see you. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing very well this wintry evening in Sydney. Nice to see you.
Yeah, so we should just, well, you'll see it if you're watching the YouTube channel. You'll see it's very dark where Marcus is and it's very light where I am. So as Marcus said, he's down in Sydney. I'm up in the UK. So we're literally the antithesis of one another right now. Day, night, summer, winter.
Pretty much, yeah. We're in those short June days. So gets dark at about 5 o'clock in our evening.
We are desperate for some summer here in the UK as we are filming this because we're not seeing it. It's raining loads and it's grey and miserable. But welcome to the SOF podcast, A Facilitator's Journey. So a question I ask everybody when we first start is, how do we know each other?
Well, it's interesting. I was thinking about this from listening to other episodes on the SOF podcast, and I'm surprised it took us until 2020 to meet, given my history with the UK Business Speakers International and then what became Rogen SI. I'm surprised we didn't cross paths earlier than what was 2020. And in fact, Miriam's Workshops Work podcast and her festival of facilitation, which I think from memory was November 2020. I still remember the 24-hour festival. And I think I met you. I got up very early on Australia's morning. It was like 4:30, 5 a.m. local time in Sydney, which meant it was capturing the late night of the UK contingent, who I think at that point you'd all had a couple of drinks and were rattling together in a Zoom room, and I just piled into that with a cup of tea in the morning, and you were there in that chat.
It was exactly that. That's hysterical. Yes, it was. Miriam strikes again. And if anyone hasn't discovered Miriam Hadness's Workshops Work podcast, I thoroughly recommend it. It is full of juiciness on the doing of facilitation, and she interviews some really great people, Marcus and myself included. So that's a little shout out for Miriam. And Marcus, help our audience to understand, like, how do you describe who you are, what you do?
Yeah, it's over the years, I think it's very easy when you're something professionally familiar, like, an accountant or an anesthesiologist or a dentist, or a vet, that single word just explains straight away what you do and the kind of work, the nature of the work that you do. I think facilitator is sort of a weird word. It's not obvious to people. I mean, I don't think my mother, bless her soul, rest in peace, I don't think she ever really understood it for all of the years that I was doing it. And, she'd see the Prime Minister on the news duffing a question response or something, and she'd say, "No, you should call Canberra. You should get involved and do some work down there." And it's like, no, Mum, we don't do media advisory for politicians or something. So the way I describe it today, I'm the co-founder of a facilitation advisory firm. So our job is to provide the service of facilitation to clients in the enterprise or clients that could become the enterprise who are scaling up, and use the craft of facilitation to help them achieve their goals. So that could involve training them in skills. They need to be better presenters, better salespeople, better at handling change. Or it could be helping them get to a conversational outcome, the road through which they're unclear, and they go, perhaps a facilitator can help us navigate that rocky path and even show us what the path might be. And that can be done in small rooms of half a dozen leaders as much as big rooms of 200 and 300 and 400 people at a conference, roadshow or event.
Yeah. And what kind of clients do you get to work with?
Well, we always very deliberately targeted the enterprise, and I don't. It's sort of a term stolen from software the way they talk about it, but the big end of town. There's a couple of reasons for that. My father was an accountant, and he said when people don't pay their bill, it's either because they can't pay or they won't pay. And he said, you can never reduce to zero the clients who won't pay, because if you, for various reasons, let them down or missed a trick or they disagree or something, there might be a won't pay. But you can certainly eliminate the can't pays by working with organisations that are themselves big, robust enterprises who've got money in the bank. So we very deliberately said, let's work with the big end of town. The big end of town talks to itself. So they share our name around. They'll say, hey, I've got a mate, I work in big bank X. I've got a friend who works in big bank Y. Have you used anyone? Do you know anyone? Who could I work with? And of course, it can be big bank X over to big pharmaceutical company A, and then it's over to FMCG player B. And so we've been very fortunate that we've been able to move around organisations as our clients' careers have themselves moved around in the same way.
Nice. I like the sound of your dad. That sounds very practical advice that he gave you all those years ago.
Yes.
And so true. Actually, I'm still falling foul though. We've got one client who is big and is out of terms on payment. So I'm about to invoke my late payment charge. I've never done that in the 18 years of running my own business, but it's now over 130 days. And it's getting ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's tricky, isn't it? Because you risk putting a dent in the relationship, but it's and I think you've got to come down to going, where has that gone awry for it to run so late?
It's at their end that they're struggling. It's that they're a big luxury fashion brand, and their market's bottoming out. But it's very frustrating for a small supplier waiting to be able to pay their facilitators.
Yes, I've often wondered, I think there's legislation in different parts around the world where that if the supplier is of a certain small size, then things must be paid in short windows of time. I don't want to quote what the rule is here because I'm sure I'll get it wrong, but something along the lines of, in some of our public sector, if it's a small organisation that is the vendor, then they must be paid within, it's either 7 or 14 days. No, it's pretty quickly. Which I think is a wonderful piece of, national cash flow. Like let's keep the money flowing around. My dad used to have a sticker he'd put on the invoice that'd say, please pay us so we can pay him and he can pay you. And it was a very clever way of saying, hey, you got to keep it flowing. It's got to keep moving around.
I love that. Someone said to me that last year in the UK, at least, Coca-Cola said they will pay their small suppliers within either 7 or 14 days of invoice, which I thought was brilliant, especially for a big company like Coke. So family coming in and out. Small teenager. It's a big teenager. I love that.
Flag that I'm on an interview. Yeah, got it.
As teenagers come through, but this is a live session, so it's cool.
Yes, live and live.
I love that, live and in life. And tell me about, because this is the facilitator's journey. It's about the business of doing business. Because when we spoke, I said, how did you start? Because you and I are of similar age and you've been facilitating training for most of your career. So where did you start out in life? How did it all begin for you?
I've always mused on this. I think if you ask the world's careers counsellors in schools and said, what do the kids come to you and ask about? And I'm imagining they go home at night, those careers counsellors, and go, oh, I had 3 people come and ask about medicine. I had 10 come and ask about being a lawyer. I had some come and ask about not-for-profit or whatever it might be. But I bet none of them ever go home and say, I had a kid come to me today in year 10 who's 16, 17 years old, and they asked about being a facilitator. I don't reckon that's ever happened. Ever, anywhere in the world. So my thesis is that this is an accidental profession. Everybody in it had some sort of professional accident that dropped them into it somehow. And I've collected the stories with colleagues over the years that there's a fork in the road, there's a sliding door moment. Mine was, I had I had an accounting background at the very beginnings with Price Waterhouse, the PW, before they merged with Coopers and Lybrand to pick up the C. The PwC we know today. And they had a cadetship program. I started in that. I moved over to a marketing major, which meant I had to give up the accounting side, which meant I had to give up the cadetship. Fell out of university with the qualification, went to work for Colgate-Palmolive and then Mitsubishi Electric, so the big American, the big Japanese. And then it was while I was at Mitsubishi Electric that, and we made, I'm always wary of saying this because nobody's ever heard of them, but we used to make microwave ovens, video cassette recorders, televisions, video camcorders. And if people go, really? I had no idea. Well, that's what 5% market share will do to you. And as part of that, we would do training and we would train the sales force. And to give your UK clients a reference, it'd be training the sales force of a Dixon's. For the US, it's training the sales force of a Best Buy. And for people in Australia, it's training the sales force of Harvey Norman or JB Hi-Fi. But those big box, brand box retailers. And someone was sick and someone needed to step up and run the training course. And I got asked, they said, would you do it? And so I learnt the slides in early days of PowerPoint, mid-90s. And I delivered the training and I quite enjoyed it and I got reasonable feedback. They said, I really enjoyed your energy and would you like to do it again? And I was like, oh, okay. And I went home as in the ordinary course of events. I was having a family dinner on a Sunday night and I'm the youngest. I've got two big sisters. And I said, I really enjoyed what I did this week. How do you get paid to talk when you haven't done anything? And at this point I was 25. Mm-hmm. And my sister, who worked for the then Lever and Kitchen, now known as Unilever, she'd been at a presentation skills training course that week with a company called Rogen. So she said, well, why don't you call these people? Because the guy at the front of the room was getting paid to talk. And I didn't even know it was the thing. I didn't even know these companies existed. And so I rang them up, all gutsy, naive, 25 years of me. And I've got very lucky. I met a charming and fortunate encounter with a guy called Jeff Sheard, who I still work with on and off today. And he backed me to say, all right, kid, which is what I was. You don't have the life experience that a consultant needs to have because I can't draw on any grey hair. There was none there. But he said, you know what? You look like you're a bit gutsy, so we'll give you a run. Mm. And as it turned out, I got on my feet running presentation skills workshops for what was then the Sydney Organising Committee for the Olympic Games, the people pulling together the 2000 Olympics. And wow. Rogen had done a sponsorship. The way they made good on that was to give free consulting or free training courses. And the best way to do that was to put a cheap resource on the delivery of those courses. That's where I came in. So I did 4 days a week for weeks in the early years of my time, running presentation skills, same workshop, 2-day workshop over and over again. Wonderful start, very fortunate, very lucky. And then met a lot of different kinds of people because you've got the accountants at SOCOG as much as the sports administrators to the marketers to the, all kinds of different people.
Love it.
And it went from there. That's how I got into it.
I think your phrase, it's an accidental profession, is a true one, because I certainly didn't start out and go, I want to be a trainer or a facilitator, because mine was same and different to what you've just described, in that I thought I wanted to be in marketing. That didn't work. So I was in sales. And then there was just this role at Diageo that became really apparent that I wanted to do. And it was they had sales capability managers and directors. So they had very clearly called out a role whereby these people, both globally, regionally and locally, would evolve and develop the capability skills of the sales teams, whether that's from strategy planning through to classic field sales or account management training sales drivers. And I just said, that's what I want to do. And I ended up in the global team and absolutely loved it for like 2.5 years. And just to your point, designing, running workshops, being lucky enough to go all around the world to work with people. And it was great to be on my feet and learning. And I was getting coached as I went as well by people who'd done it before me. And so it was accidental. So it's not like I walked in and said, this is what I want to do. But it's a job you discover, I think, when you're in a business.
Exactly right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think the sales path is a common one. Clearly you're okay talking to strangers. You're okay, walking up to somebody and saying, hi, my name's Marcus, my name's Kirsty. I think sales is probably a natural apprenticeship. You also see the people who've come out the education door, so they've stood up to a classroom or an audience, and then that's one relatively common one. And then I've also noticed the what do you call it? The acting side of things. So they had some sort of exposure to
That's true.
performing arts. That's another
I
one I've
hadn't thought of
seen
it like that.
a couple of times. Yeah. So again, they don't mind being the center of attention, standing on a stage, lots of people looking at them. I think that's probably some sort of a prerequisite to want
Yeah.
to do it.
So one of the things I get asked quite a lot is how do you go from either working like you did within Rogan or being an associate to running your own business and having your own clients, like I call them direct to client work. So what happened for you in terms of a shift and a move?
Well, and again, I think there's two things I'll credit in my story. One of them is co-founders or other people, and the other one is luck and timing. And I think it's important to acknowledge the role of luck and timing. For me, I met a colleague who I'm going to have breakfast with tomorrow morning, Gavin. Gavin was in the English business, and his lovely partner Helen was coming to Australia for her role. He asked the English business, "Hey, she's moving to Australia." I think he actually resigned. He said, "So I'm moving to Australia." And they said, "Take us with you. Why don't you go and open up the Australian office of what was then called Speakers International Corporate Development, which had a little office in Bergham Mews in Hammersmith." And so he was, literally, think back, I think they'd bought a printer and a computer sitting in storage down here, and he came down and dusted all that off and rented a little office. And they needed to recruit a couple of facilitators, although they called them coaches, which I think was early for the ubiquitous use of that term these days. But this was mid-90s, late 90s. And he approached somebody that worked at Rogan, and she didn't think she'd do it, but she thought I might like to. So she said, "Why don't you give this guy Gavin a call? He's setting up an Australian arm of an English training company." Yeah. And so I began as an employee of an Australian company wholly owned by an English one. But then what happened was the English company got some advice from Deloitte to say you should shut down your international offices. They don't make you any money. And so at that point, there was a Portugal, an Ireland, and an Australia that they closed them all down. So we were shut down on the 31st of May in 2000 because they said, "Look, you're just costing us money. The hockey stick, the payback to the UK is not there. The dollar to pound conversion wasn't flattering as you went from Aussie dollars back to sterling." Now, the thing was that Gavin and I knew what the forward order book looked like. We could see the work was coming, but England had no visibility of that. This is well before the days of Salesforce and sophisticated CRMs. So we knew the work was in the pipeline. So we looked each other in the eye and we said, "All right, can we go from being colleagues who are employed by an English owner to being owners and co-founders of an Australian local business?" So overnight, the legal status changed. We went from being employees of an English company to being owners of an Australian one. But outwardly, nothing else did. Website, everything the same.
Wow.
So we severed financial ties with the UK, but not emotional ties. So we said, "Look, we'd like to keep using the name. We'll license content. We'll pay you some royalties as they come through." And so that's how I fell into it. So I didn't have that wrenching period of months that I think many people do, where they open up an Excel spreadsheet and they do their basic costs and they go, "All right, I've got to register a website. I've got a, mobile phone, laptop," and they kind of put their first year's spreadsheet together and then decide, can they do it, build up a buffer of savings and go do it. I was lucky because effectively what the English company did was effectively bankroll the bottom of the hockey stick. So they paid for the website. They got us up and running. They paid our salaries to get going. And then we're just in the process of getting going, and they gave up on it for good strategic reasons at the time. And then the other bit that's lucky is that Gavin and I looked at each other and decided, can we do this? And said yes, because it would have been easy to go, "I don't think we can, and I don't want to do it. So see you later, mate." And it certainly wasn't without its storming as we adjusted from being, having a boss over there to being each other's conscience and confidant. And fast forward through a lot of years, and that's how I came. And then I don't know any other way, really. I've only ever been and always wanting it to be a firm, not to be a practice. So we always wanted a collection of people, not just, helping one surgeon do their surgery and, having an EA running around them, for example. If you think about how practices are what clinicians run,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. It's probably too quick on the metaphor, but I can explain it.
No, I get it. Tell me, so you were talking about you and Gavin and those early years. What were some of the things that worked really well for you both? Like people are thinking, going into work with a co-founder, what worked well?
Different skills, same values.
Nice.
So if you should draw, if you think of a Venn diagram, your Venn diagram on your skills should have a little bit of overlap, but not too much.
Yeah.
And the Venn diagram on your values should more or less overlap, maybe even look like one circle. So we valued, we thought there was a lot of pomposity in the industry. Where you see, you go, look, you're a facilitator running a workshop, like keep it in perspective. And he had this old test because he came through the performing arts where they had 3 cards, a photo on each card. One card had a photo of a bee, like a honeybee. Next card had a photo of a nurse, and the next card had a photo of an actor. And the question was, put them in order of importance. And it was a humility test, because a lot of actors would put the actor first, going, well, art is commenting on our social fabric. It helps get in touch with who we are as people. And the whole point was going, forget it, mate. What matters is that the bees pollinating the flowers and we have a working ecosystem so none of us die. Bees are much more important than actors. And for the record, nurses are way more important than actors as well, in case you didn't have that. It was a humility exercise. And that was... I've never forgotten it, because it was at the heart of what I still hold to this day, of going, be humble, work hard, be grateful. Our clients don't need to give us the work they give us. It's very fortunate work. We're invited into quite intimate settings, in organisational settings. We don't sell them curtains and carpet. We sell them conversations. And, some of those conversations they're the sorts of conversations that a Wall Street business journalist would kill to get into a room and hear a leadership team talking honestly and candidly about what's going on in their business. So be very grateful for that. Be very appreciative of that. Cherish the variety. Recognise that there are good bits and bad bits. And that was a value we both shared, and that helped us to then build a team around us. And that we wanted a business. We wanted an entity that had a population of people rather than just a practice, if you like, of
just doing. Someone called it on an earlier episode. It's just, they called it, are you a project shop or are you a business? So
yes, I was listening to
James
that episode. Yes, James Gardner's episode. Yes, exactly that. I related to that metaphor where there's nothing wrong with, like, a project shop. That's just a business that has to keep finding its work. And most of our businesses have, that lack of annuity income. In other words, you wake up on the 1st of January and you got to start again. You got to go find the work, and there's lots of businesses that are like that, and that's okay. It's more to go, we wanted a brand, and this is where you get into a debate about, are you here for the name on the door or the name on my business card?
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think that's really interesting. So one of the things, so we'll talk about that in a moment. I just want to go, what happened, because you and Gavin, how long did you work together?
So we worked together from 1999 through to about 2012, and where we had another little stroke of luck in that we came into contact with what was then known as STW, which was the holding company for a basket of marketing communications firms. Itself was a subsidiary effectively of WPP. In fact, WPP bought it out in the more recent years. So it was, I think at one point it had like 76 different advertising, branding, communications, PR kinds of businesses, which gradually tilted towards the digital as time went on. And we were bought along during that sort of acquisitive spree in 2005. And we were bought over 6 years. And so we had a 6-year earnout, which meant it expired in the beginnings of 2012, which is when I left. Gavin got an additional role in the holding company. So he stayed on for a couple more years. Our other co-founder, Ben, he'd also moved on. So Ben came into the picture in 2001. He brought the name Oxygen Learning. So we were known. He was also a UK offshoot as well. And then we rebranded as Fuel in about 2007. So some listeners will know that brand. And that all ended in 2012, and 10,000 Hours started the next year in 2013.
Cool. So let's talk about 10,000 Hours. I think it's a cool name. I guess where the name comes from, but can you share with the listener what does that mean for you? 10,000 Hours.
Yeah, look, it's funny. I thought everybody would know about it, but I've since come to realise about half of people have heard of it. Heard of the rule that Malcolm Gladwell made famous on Anders Ericsson's work about expertise and mastery, which was it takes. And look, people jump up and down, and it's been debunked, and it kind of hasn't really. When you look at cognitively complex pursuits, meaning you've got to think hard to be good at them. And so that is things like musician and chef and doctor. And, they've done some studies where they've taken rather biomechanically simple tasks and gone, you don't need 10,000 hours to be good at them. And that's true. But they're not comparing what Anders Ericsson was talking about. They're also missing the point about deliberate practice, which is working at the edge of your competence, being right at the edge of what you can do.
One of my favourite books, Marcus, that I've read of all time was in 2011, and it was Bounce by Matt Said. And I don't know if you've read that. And he
talks the table tennis one.
Yeah, the poor man. I've introduced him onto a stage. I got very giddy. I had my little moment of, I love your books. Anyway, I came across that piece around deliberate practice in his book because that was the penny dropping moment when he said, how many of you reading this book can drive a car? And how many of you are 40 plus? And you've probably driven over for 10,000 hours, but it does not make you an F1 driver. What will make you a Formula One driver is the fact that you have gone and learnt the skills to drive that car on a track. You have the right equipment, i.e. the Formula One car. You have a coach. You have someone giving you giving you feedback, and then you have this purposeful practice, and then you have a feedback, and then you go and practice again, then you have the feedback. And it was just so the 10,000 hour piece is only true if you actually practice and get feedback and take away that feedback and reapply it, as you were just saying. So anyway,
that's it. And that's the bit everybody misses, right? Which I think, because I think the number was attractive. It's such a round number. It's a lovely, neat number, 10,000. But anyway, that book came out in 2011, and my co-founder in 10,000 Hours, and I hope the listeners can hear the theme of co-founder with Gavin, co-founder now with Chris. I don't know how people do facilitation businesses, possibly any business, on their own. I really don't. I've had the good fortune of doing two, but each time with the co-founder, and I can't fathom not having a friend, a confidant, an ally, a shoulder, someone to kick me in the pants when that's needed. People talk about, trust your instinct, trust your gut. I think sometimes you give yourself terrible advice. So I quite like having, we often talk about outsource your sanity. So I want to give the problem to someone else and go, what do you make of this? Because I'm pissed off about it. And at least 30% of the time, their response will be, maybe it's just you getting pissed off. Take a breath and think about it again in the morning. That's useful.
That's very useful. So two things coming up for me. One, I love Australian sense of humour, by the way. Having dated a few Aussies, I love the reality of check of get over yourself. It's more often than not, it is ourselves. So firstly, I just want to acknowledge that. And secondly, I'm sitting here, and if you're listening, you won't see me squirming in that I am a solo founder, and I find it really hard sometimes to do things without a partner in crime. And there have been many years I'm like, I'd love to work with someone else. And I can't work out where to find someone. Because whenever I approach people and go, hey, what do you think to this idea? Either it's a firm no, or they're just like, no, I'm really happy just doing everything on my own because I just want a small business or just me. And then I'm like, well, there must be people out there who are up for doing it together. That sounds really wrong. But and I just don't know where to look. Or no one's crossed my path. So I feel a bit sad at times. And you came up with a phrase the other day that we talked about was professional loneliness. And that's why you have the business. And so sometimes I do feel professionally lonely.
Yeah, I don't. I can imagine it. I think. I mean, we'll get to it. I think we'll talk about associates, but I think professional loneliness is a thing. And our chairman, Ken, he spoke about that. There are people looking for a professional pack to run with.
Yeah.
You want a green room to walk backstage on and take your makeup off and kick your shoes off and
Yeah.
sit there and go, well, shit, that was hard today. They really challenged me and And I did it with one of our team this morning. She had a tough workshop late last week where the participants were cranky with their organisation, and they basically vented all that crankiness via her, the third-party facilitator who's in the room, and she did a lovely job and made the best of it. But she came away quite sort of depleted and a bit frustrated in the whole experience. But we had a cup of tea, and I said, "Let's sit down and just talk about it." And she had a place to go with her, as we say, somewhere to go with your mad thoughts. It's something that a psychologist might say, so your thoughts can die so you don't have to. Because you'll say something like, I just wanted to tell them all to, and of course you can't say that, because if you do say that, you'll get kicked out and that'll be the end of the project and it's over. And that, so you muzzle it and muffle it.
Yeah.
But now it's all bottled up inside of you, and, where's that going to go? So that's the co-founder part of my story, which if I was doing it again, I would absolutely always do it with another person to help you hold each other up. We've always often said, as long as one of us is up when the other one is down, we'll be fine.
Exactly.
So through COVID, we
So
oscillated.
true.
There were days when I'm going, this is terrible, this is the disaster. And he'd go, no, it's going to be okay. Look at this, look at this, look at this. And he'd point to data points that were more encouraging. And then I'd have to go, nah, that's true. Okay, all right.
Okay, I'm just having one of those days. I've not been out the house for 24 hours. It's doing my head in. There are two other things I'd love to talk about. So we were talking about building a brand and what's the brand, and then also associates. So tell me about, and I've seen this with other people, like brand versus Marcus Crowe.
Well, I think
let's just talk about what do we mean by that first.
Well, I'll call a practice
Go on.
myname.com. Right. So if you're going to do myname.com, which is what most of them are, it's a perfectly valid way to operate, right? That's what every surgeon does. I mean, a surgeon just stops practicing one day. They just decide this will be my last operation, and then after that, they hang the gloves up and they're done. And that's a perfectly valid way to run professional life. You say, look, this is me. It's me.com. You hire me, you get me. And that's how it's going to go. There's debate in the restaurant trade. I think, is it Gordon Ramsay who believes, no, not Gordon Ramsay. One of them believes, no, Marco Pierre White believes if it's your restaurant, if you put your name on the door, you need to be in the kitchen. So that's quite a strident view, as opposed to some of the other scaled chefs who've going, oh no, my name's on multiple doors and multiple kitchens on any one night. No, they're just different. They're not wrong. They're just different ways to think about it. Now, the problem with myname.com is you generate no asset value. There's no balance sheet value in the entity, because if someone's going to come along and they're going to have a look at its future cash flows, they'll go, well, what are these future cash flows if you're not here to generate them? So what am I buying? There's nothing to buy, really. Whereas if you decide, I don't want to create myname.com, and that doesn't mean you just have another name for your business, like, Sunrise Facilitation. It's actually got to be another name that in turn houses a collection of people, so that people learn to trust. The trust will live with the professionals initially. They'll go, oh, you've got Kirsty and you've got Miriam in your team. Oh, that's a good team. Let's hire you guys because Kirsty's there or because Miriam's there. And then you've got to do some work to go, I need to get more Kirstys and more Miriams. So they just start to go, look, as long as it's someone from School of Facilitation, as long as it's someone from 10,000 Hours, because all a brand really is curation. So they're just saying, if you've curated the people inside the firm, I can trust that curation. Yeah. So it tells me that I'm going to get someone who's good. And then, of course, you've got to then be rigorous about those quality standards.
And I think also, so when you started out, let's say the first business, were you clear that it was going to be more than you and Gav? or did that just suddenly you're like, actually, we can make this more than just us? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And because that's all we knew. So what Speakers International did, which was novel at the time and is quite common these days, and we follow this model. They separate the sales from the delivery. So they had a team of people selling, which they largely recruited out of recruitment. That's where Gav had come from. So they got them out of executive search firms, Hayes, these kinds of Michael Page, these kinds of places, because they were really great salespeople, used to bashing a phone, making meetings, getting in front of people, and they're selling a human solution, if you like. It's not training, but it's talent. So the Rolodex overlapped quite well. And those people would bash the phones and sell the workshops, and then there was a team of facilitators who would then go and deliver those workshops. Yeah. So we all, and in mine and Gav's origin, and Ben came along. So Gav was the seller, and myself and Ben were the doer. And so we're going, look, there's only 3 jobs. There's sell, do, and count. So there's selling the work, doing the work, and then there's counting, which is, finance, admin, HR, tax, legal, whatever. And so you go, the best use of our time is either selling or doing. So then outsource the counting. So go get a bookkeeper, and then get on with the selling and the doing. And the more of that, that's happening, the better the firm.
Yeah, actually, and anyone who's listening to this who does this solo, I would absolutely recommend outsourcing the bookkeeping piece, because it will. The way businesses operate now, the time it takes to onboard into their systems, send out. Yes, it's quick to send out invoices, but then there's the tax, there's the VAT, there's just managing your bank accounts. I would absolutely bet you could easily spend a day a month, 2 days a month on that, and actually you could spend those 2 days selling or meeting new clients or doing delivery. So that was one of my first roles I ever outsourced.
Agreed.
I had to do that. I am smiling about what you said about how Speakers International used people from recruitment, because I think Andrew still does that now at Arcadia, knowing some of the people he has come through. So that's another mutual connection that Marcus and I have, is another business called Arcadia. It's a leadership business, and Andrew, who's there, we'll get him on as a guest at some point, I'm sure. So in terms of building a brand, one of the things we have to do is shift people's perception away from it being, as you saying, Marcus Crowe or Ben or Kirsty or Miriam. How do you do that?
Over time and with consistency. I think, there's a lovely piece by David Maister on what it's like to be a client of a services firm. And he talks about the fact that a client of a services firm is anxious, is nervous, is worried. They're giving, maybe they've left it too late. They're bringing you in at the last minute. It's an important event. It's got to go well. They're honestly, there can be little balls of anxiety and worry, which is why they rely on referral. You can't meet the supply side of our industry. Whereas if you're looking to buy an audit, let's say, and you want an audit from a big 4, the clue's in the name, right? There's only 4 people to meet. So you can have 4 cups of coffee and go, I have met all of the available providers of a big audit for a FTSE 100 or an ASX 100. And so now I'm going to choose. Whereas if you say, I'd like to meet all the facilitators that are available and then I will choose one.
Oh my God.
It doesn't work. The market's too fragmented. So whenever we're faced with a fragmented supply side, we go with recommendation. Which is why we choose, Google ratings. That's like when we go, well, there's lots of pizza restaurants. Which one has all the ratings?
True.
Because I can't go and, sample all the pizza places in town. Same with the facilitators. So people go with referral. And so those referrals are initially names of people. But eventually that becomes, I'll just call 10,000 hours. They'll be able to help you. And that'll only get said if that client can say, I've worked with them a number of times and worked with a number of their team, and it's always good. And so that's the holy grail, is that your client has exposure to more than one of you in the team and has a good experience in every outing that they have. And that's when they start to trust the house brand more, as much or more than, or at least as much as
the individual
any personal individual brand.
Absolutely.
At which point you've got a business, because now you can have a holiday and it doesn't collapse because the founder of the business go away for a week and it doesn't fall in a heap because things are still happening.
That's so true. It's like, is that the litmus test? I can take a holiday and the business will still run itself.
Mm.
I think it is.
Or,
I think
yeah, more or
there's an
less.
absolute truth in there, and you're not checking your emails, and you're not worrying and thinking, "Oh God, what's going on?" Like, because you know it's in safe hands. Like you've left it with a team, and that being the
Well,
operative word, a
I,
team.
I still check in. I've always said to my family, I said, you'll get a better version of me. Just give me half an hour to look at it all. I'll
Yeah,
make sure nothing's burning, and then I'll switch it off, and
yeah.
I'm here.
Fair
Yeah.
shout. Actually, I'm probably exactly the same. And anyone else listening to this who runs a business will probably say exactly the same as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so let's just summarize a bit about building a brand. It does take time.
Mm.
I absolutely agree with that. Like you can't just go, oh, trust me, I'm School of Facilitation just because it says what it does. It's a name.
Mm.
That's not enough.
Yeah.
I think there's this piece around we are in a referral business. So you want people to be
Yes.
referring by name of the business, not by the individual. I think it's the people who are doing the referring as well have been able to have multiple touch points to the individuals in your team. I think there's another piece as well for me, which is when you are talking to future clients and they're starting to say, so you'll do the work, is a switch in your language, because especially in the early days of moving to running as a business versus a solo enterprises, people are going, so they talk about you. Are you going to do this work? When are you available? And so I use language like my team, and I
Mm.
will see who has capacity. And I
Mm.
seed it really early on in my language with that potential client that it won't be me
Mm.
doing the work, because they sometimes come in believing you will be the person doing the work.
Which is one of the
And that's a
benefits of
shift.
separating the selling from the doing, because if they know they're dealing with the commercial person, they know
Yeah,
that it's
true.
not even a possibility. And that commercial person can even use, I mean, we love it. Their best feedback is when they say, oh, so will you be doing it? And they can say, oh, you don't want me. I'm a commercial player. I got colleagues who all they do is they live and breathe groups and group dynamics.
Nice.
And, it's a
Love it.
lovely way to segue up. But they'll always want to meet. In most cases, they want to have a quick call with the facilitator,
Yeah.
just to check, can I put you in front of my people? Am I going to be okay when I do
Of
that?
course, you want a chemistry test. And then, so do you have associates or do you have full-time facilitators in your team?
We have both. So we have some full-time folks in our team who that's all they do is wake up every day and go and run workshops. Well, not every day, but
Yeah.
most days of most weeks. And then we also have an associate team who, depending on the project, and everybody listening to this you have a lot of episodes about associate freelance life.
Yeah.
So we wanted to create a bit of a home for freelance facilitators where they can find community and, again, that collegiate support and ideas for workshops. And so we'll help our associates on anything they're working on, whether it's one of ours or one of their own or one for someone else. We
Nice.
just say, what do you got? And, and probably younger me wouldn't have been I would have been more worried about IP and ideas. And I think that is a false logic these days. I mean, all
Yeah.
of our,
I'm
all
so
our
with you.
clients have got all the concepts. They can Google and blog and look up anything from anywhere,
Absolutely.
run a workshop on it the next afternoon. So I think those days are gone. Where your value is your model or something. Your value is your chemistry and your charm
Yeah.
and your charisma and
And
your
your people.
capacity to make it sensible and yeah.
I've never sort of indulged in the IP conversation because, again, to your point, you can look up any model that we use in facilitation and training, whether it's sales, leadership, it's there for the taking, unless you've
Yeah.
gone and created something super unique that's in, I think, more like the psychometric space. I think it's really hard to IP models in what we do. And I think even it was been, I didn't IBM, didn't, who owns Spin? Is that Wiley?
Well, Neil Rackham was the original. If you track it all the way back, I think he then went and worked for IBM. No, it was Xerox Learning Systems, and then Xerox ended up with a training company it didn't really know what to do with, and that became
Okay.
Learning International, which became Achieve Global. And then I've sort of lost track of all the buyings and sellings of the methodology houses.
No, I
But
just heard that IBM had bought in whoever used Spin and like used them for a couple of years, and then turned around and said, "Oh, thank you very much. We're sort of severing ties now," as most companies do. And then it was discovered that IBM were using the spin selling without license, and then whoever owned spin took them to court, and it got thrown out of court because they were just like, you can't IP that because it's questioning and listening skills. It's it's
we
not
got a letter
robust
from
enough.
we got a letter at Fuel years ago from Huthwaite saying, we had a sales program that had, the groundbreaking concept of asking open and closed questions, listening, doing follow-up questions, positioning your product in line with the client's needs, nothing overly remarkable.
Yeah.
And we got this sort of steamy legal letter about you are using it. It's like, oh, come on.
God, how can you IP an open question?
Well, they argue it's the sequence of, well, you've done that, then that, then that, then that. And I'm sure legal minds listening would say, look, there are probably some certain contexts in which it's protectable, but not for all practical purposes. And this is even as the internet was emerging, let alone these days when, every blogger and podcaster is talking about everyone's piece of anything.
Absolutely. So as we come to the end of our lovely conversation, what wise words would you give somebody who is maybe more at that point of they're already working for themselves, they might even have a co-founder, like what should they be thinking about in terms of if they want to scale? What would be some of your advice?
I think if you're going to scale a great team, it's got to be meaningful for those in the team, and there's got to be an opportunity for them to participate in the value the firm's creating. And so it's probably not an obvious choice, but I'd actually invest in your equity structure and your ability for people in your team to earn the right and work their way into participating in the ownership of the firm. And of course, all partnerships are examples of that, where those senior lawyers are invited into the partnership, and it's a demanding and yet lucrative invitation if everything works out well. So that would be my advice. That is, I'd have two. I'd say I think working with a co-founder has some advantages. Of course, it can go horribly wrong, and it's not to say it's an automatic ticket to prosperity. And I'm sure there are people who've got cases of where that has been. It hasn't been that fruitful. So it's important. I'm lucky. My experience has been a fortunate one. But I found it useful to have a second pair of hands and a second mind along the way. And then also investing in an equity structure. So we have a full chairman and full, constitution and shareholders agreement and board meeting minutes. And we always said, treat ourselves like a really big, sophisticated company. So when one of those buys us, the due diligence will be quick. So when you give them the books to look at, if they're looking in a shoebox of receipts with, your dog on the payroll or something, like that's a disaster. Whereas if you hand them a bound copy of board minutes going back over the last 3 years with a full set of financials, everything there. So we always took that view. So we over-engineered on the statutory stuff so that it was way more than a little company would need, but it means down the track we're an easy thing to look at due diligence for.
You talked about just before we do the quick fire questions, you talked about things can go wrong with a co-founder, and in Meg's episode we talk about professional divorce and ending of relationships, because it does happen. And having the conversations in advance, I think when you go into these structures like you're describing, what if play out the scenarios whilst all is good, and then should it happen, you've already started that conversation. It's not a big surprise. It's like ending.
Yes, I'd recommend a book, Partnership Charter. Our accountant recommended it to us, Partnership Charter, and it literally goes through something like 40 different scenarios, which are pretty grisly, some of them, like what happens if one of you has an accident that renders you intellectually less able, what happens if one of you has a criminal record, if one of you gets a gambling problem, if one of you is an alcoholic, what happens if one of your partner gets cancer? It's pretty. It's not fun, but they're all quite plausible life events. And do this long enough, and you'll come across people who've got these various stories, and it just forces you to have a conversation about, okay, well, what will we do in that instance, and how do we manage that? And what are the mechanisms that navigate the business and both parties through that icky set of affairs?
That sounds great. God, I tell you what, You and accountants seem to have a lot of good conversations. First your dad and then this accountant. It's like you get some good advice.
Well, I think
Okay.
they see all the bad stuff, right? Accountants see the rainy days, and it's good to talk to them because they'll show you. Everyone will tell you how a business can go well. Accountants can tell you the 100 ways they can go wrong.
Yeah,
because they see it.
I love my accountant. She helps us all the time with tax and shitty EU regulations that we now have to deal with, which is just bloody painful. Anyway, I've got 4 questions to ask you. Quick fire.
Okay.
I want you to imagine young Marcus starting out. What advice would you give him?
Enjoy your client's company and relish the social side of professional life.
Oh, I love it. Who do you follow in social media land that you think others should know about?
I'm not a big consumer of social media.
Okay.
This feels like a bad answer.
No.
So I've got nothing profound to offer that one.
And do you know what? More and more people are saying that as their answer, which I think is interesting, is they're not playing in social media. And that's an interesting conversation in itself. Books or podcast. What book or podcast would you like to recommend to people at this time?
Peter Block has a book called Flawless Consulting. That's an interesting read. There is another book called Lords of Strategy, which talks about the origins of the management consulting firm. They're all interesting books that talk about, you start life as a university medalist and you end it as a salesperson. And it's a very interesting way to think about the career of professional life and services firms. And I think anything by David Maister, True Professionalism, Trusted Advisor, Strategy and the Fat Smoker, any of those books are good. He got out of the game just as podcast came into it. So I think there's an old archive of his Apple podcast, but he kind of retired and gave it away before Spotify's and Netflix's came along. But his stuff's worthwhile.
Okay. And how have you invested in yourself or your business to support you in moving forward?
We used COVID to open a software company so that we would give ourselves the opportunity to be the licensor instead of the licensee. And again, in Richard Gerdon's episode, he talked about productize and how fraught and difficult that is with IP and content in our trade. So Pod and Hive, and that's podandhive.com if people are curious. We have now got the opportunity to give facilitators licenses to multi-screen games. We're in ATD in New Orleans only last month in May, and we are ready to go. So that business now will allow a facilitator anywhere to purchase per head licenses to play these wonderful thematic games that are beautifully and richly designed and that debrief out elegantly to make a point. And we invite the facilitator community to have a look at it, podandhive.com. Dolphins play in pods, bees work in hives.
Love it. Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to go and find that. And there will be details on how to find Marcus and his team and his business in the show notes. So if that captures your imagination to find out more about Pod and Hive, there'll be a link somewhere below in the paperwork of this podcast. Marcus, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been wonderful having this conversation with you, and go well.
Thank you, Kirsty. Always a pleasure, and look forward to chatting again and listening to the next few episodes on your lovely podcast. Thank you for putting it on.
Thank you.